In 1949, a fragment of clay came out of a trench in the southern Iraqi desert and was placed into a wooden tray alongside hundreds of others, palm-sized, cracked diagonally across the lower third, one edge scorched, as if it had been near something burning a very long time ago. The excavation team catalogued it as a hymn fragment, ritual praise for a temple, standard Sumerian religious text, nothing unexpected. It was logged, wrapped, and transferred to institutional storage. For decades, it was exactly what the label said it was. Then a linguist cross-referencing Eridu tablet groups against a digitization archive noticed something in the lower register. 3 signs, pressed into the clay below the hymn language in a position where no liturgical phrase should appear. Not a divine epithet, not a poetic flourish, not damage. 3 specific signs, a direction marker, a depth indicator, and something that one independent reading of the text described as a measurement interval. The official note in the excavation record called it a scribal error. That explanation held for a long time, until the same 3 signs appeared on a completely different tablet, found not at Eridu but at Nippur, 200 kilometers north, in a text that had nothing to do with temple hymns. That was the first problem. It would not be the last. The site where the Eridu fragment was found is called Tel Abu Shahrain today. In the ancient world, it was simply Eridu, and according to the Sumerian king list, it was the first city. Not one of the first. The first. The text is unambiguous. When kingship descended from heaven, it descended here. When archaeologists excavated the site between 1946 and 1949, they found 18 superimposed layers of mud brick temple construction, one on top of the other, each built over the ruins of the last. The oldest layer dates to approximately 5,400 BC, the Ubaid period. Nothing comparable in age or continuity has been found anywhere else in the region. Eridu was not symbolic of a beginning. It was architecturally an actual one. The temple at its center was called the E-abzu, the house of the Abzu. It was dedicated to the god Enki, the Sumerian deity of deep water, wisdom, and creation. And the cuneiform record describing it uses a phrase that does not appear often in ancient texts: the pure place where no one is to enter. That prohibition is worth pausing on. Not because a sacred space would be restricted, that is expected, but because the description of the E-abzu in the poem known as Enki's Journey to Nippur does not read like a metaphor. It names materials: silver, lapis lazuli. It names a sound system, 7 tigi drums and incantations. It specifies construction details and then issues a prohibition against entry in language that reads less like religious poetry and more like a structural warning. To mainstream scholars, this is elevated liturgy, the Sumerians glorifying their most sacred site in architectural language. That reading is reasonable. The problem is the pool. Archaeologists confirmed the existence of a real freshwater pool at the entrance to the E-abzu, and inside that pool they found carp bones, living carp. Not a decorative painting of fish, not a carved relief, actual fish, which require a constant inflow of fresh, oxygenated water to survive. In a marshland temple at the edge of the desert, someone was maintaining a living aquatic environment as part of the religious structure. The mainstream reading says the pool represented the Abzu, the mythological freshwater deep beneath the earth. That the pool was a symbol, but symbols do not usually need plumbing, and the water for that pool had to come from somewhere. The word E-abzu itself gives some indication of what the Sumerians meant. In cuneiform, Z-U-A-B, water, deep. It is the direct etymological ancestor of the English word abyss. In Sumerian cosmology, the E-abzu was the primordial freshwater ocean beneath the earth. Below the underworld known as Kur, below the void layer above that, pressing upward into the soil and feeding every spring, every well, every river. It was not simply underground water in a practical sense. It was the foundational layer of existence. And Enki lived there, not in a temple on earth dedicated to the place, in the place itself. Below, the tablet of destinies, the object that in Mesopotamian mythology conferred supreme authority over the cosmos, was not kept by Enlil on earth. According to the Sumerian poem Ninurta and the Turtle, Enki held it in the E-abzu, below the underworld, below the void, the most powerful document in the known universe, stored beneath the ocean floor. Mainstream scholars classify all of this as cosmological symbolism. The E-abzu is the divine deep, not a physical location. The temple pool is a ritual representation, not a structural connection. And that reading may be correct, but it does not easily explain the three signs in the lower register of the Eridu fragment: a direction, a depth, a measurement interval. These are not the building blocks of poetry, they are the building blocks of a coordinate. The linguist who identified the match with the Nippur tablet was working inside a digitization project that has since grown into one of the largest machine translation efforts in Assyriology. By 2025, researchers had published datasets covering over 91,000 Sumerian cuneiform tablets with AI transliteration systems achieving accuracy levels above 97%. The technology to re-examine disputed sign groupings at scale now exists. The Eridu fragment and its Nippur parallel have not been flagged as priority targets within that system. They remain in the general archive. The Nippur tablet itself is a partially damaged incantation text related to the Apkallu. That word, Apkallu, appears in the cuneiform record across multiple centuries and multiple texts, and what it describes is specific enough to be unsettling. The Apkallu were 7 figures sent by Enki from the E-abzu before the Great Flood to teach human beings the foundations of civilization: writing, law, agriculture, temple construction, the moral code the Sumerians called the Me. They are depicted in Neo-Assyrian relief carvings as fish-human hybrids, figures with the lower body of a carp and the upper body of a man, occasionally with wings, dressed in scaled robes. They arrived from the sea. They taught everything. And then the flood came, and after it, they went back. In the Era epic, the god Marduk speaks a line that has been interpreted as a lament. Where are the 7 sages of the E-abzu, the pure Puradu fish, who just as their lord Enki have been endowed with sublime wisdom? Mainstream scholars read this as mourning, a rhetorical question about wisdom lost after the deluge, now replaced by ordinary human scholars called umanu. That interpretation is plausible, but there is a structural problem with it. In the original Akkadian, according to one disputed reading, the verb form is not the grammar of grief. It is closer to the grammar of inquiry, not where did they go, when do they return. The Apkallu were not killed by the flood. They were, according to the Era epic, sent back, banished to the E-abzu, below the water, in the same place they came from. If this is poetry, it is poetry about a departure that looks like a filing. They were not destroyed, they were stored. And now the Eridu fragment becomes something more specific, A temple described as sealed in a city described as the first, near a body of water that was not always a body of water. This is where the geology becomes relevant. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, the Persian Gulf did not exist as it does today. The entire region was dry land, a fertile river corridor fed by the Tigris and Euphrates as they ran south toward the Indian Ocean. Sea levels at that time were more than 100 meters lower than they are now. As the Ice Age ended and the ice sheets melted, water rose and filled the corridor. The northern Gulf submerged. What had been habitable lowland became the seafloor. This is not speculation. It is confirmed geological record, supported by bathymetric surveys that have identified ancient river channels, paleo-shoreline formations, and pre-inundation landscape features still visible beneath the current Gulf floor. Eridu sits at the northern edge of what was once that corridor. The founding poem of the city reads, "All the lands were sea. Then Eridu was made." Mainstream scholars classify this as a creation myth, the standard cosmological assertion that order emerged from primordial chaos. And in most religious traditions, that is exactly what it would be. But in this particular city, in this particular geography, those words describe something that actually happened in geological time. Before the flood, there was land. Then the water came. Then Eridu was built on the edge of the new shoreline. The myth and the sediment record are not in conflict. They are, point for point, the same story. The implication, according to some alternative researchers, is that whatever the E-abzu texts describe, whatever was sealed, prohibited, built with silver and lapis lazuli, equipped with sound systems, protected by a divine prohibition against entry, could now be sitting below the Gulf, 30 to 70 meters down, depending on the precise location referenced in the tablet text. Preserved, inaccessible, unscanned. In the late 1990s, according to one alternative archaeology publication, a proposal for a targeted sonar survey of the northern Gulf based on textual coordinate analysis was submitted to a regional authority. No survey was conducted. The submission is not publicly accessible. This is noted without a primary citation and should be treated as alleged. It may be administrative delay. It may be resource limitation. It may be that it never happened at all. But in the context of this particular set of converging details, the absence of a survey is its own kind of data. The 3rd century Babylonian priest Berosus, writing in Greek for a Hellenistic audience, described the first of the Apkallu, a figure he called Oannes, as emerging from the Erythraean Sea, which ancient geographers used to refer to the region of the Persian Gulf and surrounding waters. Berosus described Oannes as a being with the body of a fish and the voice and limbs of a man, who came ashore each day to teach the first humans and returned to the ocean each night. This is not Sumerian mythology filtered through later religion. This is a Babylonian priest writing for a Greek audience, describing the same fish sages emerging from the same body of water, doing the same thing, and then going back. Some alternative researchers have pointed to what they consider parallel structures in other traditions. Fish sage figures in Phoenician mythology, the Dogon astronomical knowledge in West Africa, which some claim encodes information about the Sirius system that requires optical instruments to observe. Fishman imagery on Indus Valley seals from a civilization that had, according to mainstream archaeology, no documented contact with Mesopotamia. Mainstream scholars classify these as convergent archetypes, the universal pattern of the flood survivor, the stranger from the sea, the bringer of knowledge. That is the standard and reasonable response to claimed cross-cultural parallels. But the convergent archetype explanation becomes harder to apply cleanly when the details are not just thematically similar, but structurally specific. Not simply a wise being from the water, a fish-bodied figure from the southern ocean who came before a flood, who taught civilization, and who went back. The question is not whether different ancient peoples were in contact. The alternative interpretation does not require contact. It requires only that each culture independently preserve the memory of the same event, something that emerged from the ocean floor, transmitted knowledge to early humans, and returned below when the flood came. If that is mythology, it is mythology with a suspiciously consistent curriculum. Now return to the lower register of the Eridu fragment. The three signs: direction, depth, interval. The mainstream reading, scribal error, contamination, unresolved anomaly has the virtue of simplicity, but the same three signs appear in the Nippur incantation text related to the Apkallu. Different city, different century, different text type, same structural position within the tablet layout, same sequence. Mainstream philology notes that sign repetition across Sumerian texts is common and does not imply coordination. That is true. But the specific grouping of a direction marker, a depth indicator, and a measurement interval in the same order, in a non-liturgical position, in two different texts about two related subjects, is harder to explain as coincidence than as a pattern. If the measurement interval is not a scribal anomaly and not a distance, then according to one disputed alternative reading, it may be a time cycle, a precessional interval. The Babylonian astronomical compendium, known as Bul-Apin, compiled around 1000 BCE on cuneiform tablets and now held in museum collections, contains a formal division of the sky into three celestial paths. The northern path belonged to Enlil, the equatorial path to Anu. The southern path, the stars below the equator, the stars that dipped toward the horizon, the stars that could barely be seen from southern Mesopotamia, was formally designated the path of Ea, Enki's domain, the stars of the deep. Among those southern stars, the Babylonian catalogues assigned one a name that does not appear elsewhere in the list. Canopus, the second brightest star in the night sky, visible only at extreme southern declination, was called Emul-Nunki, the star of the city of Eridu, Eridu's star. And here is where that matters. Canopus cannot be seen from Eridu. It sits so far south on the celestial sphere that from the latitude of the ancient city, it would skim the horizon at best, and for much of the year, it would not rise at all. The Sumerians assigned their oldest, most sacred city a star that the city itself could not see. Mainstream scholars explain this as symbolic association. Canopus represented the south, the deep, the edge of the known world, and Eridu represented the same things on earth. The star and the city shared a conceptual meaning. That is a coherent explanation. But if Canopus marked not the city, but the origin, if the star of Eridu was pointing at the place the Apkallu came from, not the place the humans lived, then Emul. Nunki is not a symbol of Eridu. It is a vector, a star that cannot be seen from the shore, pointing south into the deep below the horizon toward the ocean floor. Three independent ancient sources, the Eridu fragment, the Nippur incantation, the Mu-Apin star path, appear to agree on a direction. The precession of the equinoxes completes a full cycle in approximately 26,000 years, the path of Ea in the southern sky shifts position across that cycle. Some alternative researchers argue that certain Sumerian astronomical texts encode an awareness of this cycle, that the measurement interval in the Eridu fragment encodes not a distance but a number of years, calculated from the tablet's own composition date, marking a future point in the precessional cycle. Mainstream scholars acknowledge that the Babylonians tracked precession, but debate how early that awareness was formalized. The claim that a damaged Eridu fragment encodes a precessional return date has no peer-reviewed support. As speculation, what makes it difficult to dismiss entirely is not the claim itself, but the context in which it sits. The sign grouping appears in two places. Neither mainstream reading has explained why it is there, and the Apkallu were not destroyed. According to the texts, they were sent back with a plan to return. In 2025, academic researchers published a dataset containing over 91,000 Sumerian tablets being processed by AI transliteration systems at scale. The precision is now high enough to detect subtle sign variations across thousands of documents simultaneously. The particular fragments from Eridu and Nippur, containing the disputed three-sign grouping, have not been isolated as a research target. The AI tools that could re-examine every Sumerian tablet in global archives for recurrences of that specific sign sequence exist. They are not pointed at this question: Persian Gulf. Deep floor surveys using modern bathymetric sonar can resolve features at resolutions of less than a meter. The northern Gulf floor, the submerged corridor that was dry land before the Ice Age ended, has been partially mapped. Ancient river channels are visible. Pre-inundation formations are confirmed. No artificial structures have been identified in those surveys, but the mapping is incomplete. The deepest sections and the areas closest to the ancient Eridu shoreline have not been fully surveyed with current technology. There is no confirmed structure beneath the Gulf. There is also no complete map of the floor it would be hiding in. Some alternative researchers have drawn a further line connecting the Atrahasis epic's account of human creation, Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag forming humanity from clay mixed with the blood of a sacrificed divine being, to recent findings in population genetics. A study published in recent years identified what appears to be a severe bottleneck in the human ancestral population roughly 900,000 years ago, suggesting the number of human ancestors may have dropped to fewer than 2,000 individuals before recovering. The connection between this genetic finding and the Atrahasis creation account is not academically supported. As speculation, it is raised here only to note that the tablet's descriptions of human origins are becoming harder to read as pure invention as the scientific picture of early humanity grows more complex. The Eridu fragment is in storage. The lower register has been photographed. The catalog entry exists. The three signs are documented. No dedicated published analysis has been written about them. The official reading remains. A hymn, a temple dedication, a poetic glorification of a mythological domain, damaged, fragmentary, standard. The alternative reading, which has no peer-reviewed support and should be treated accordingly, is something different, a location, a depth, a time interval, a sealed structure built with silver and lapis lazuli and 7 tuned drums below the ocean, in the place the sages came from before the flood and went back to after it. The star of that place cannot be seen from its surface. The water that kept the temple pool alive came from below. The prohibition against entry was not metaphorical. The Apkallu were not killed. They were filed. If the translation is wrong, if the three signs are only a scribal error, the fish bones only organic debris, the star association only symbolic, the Gulf only empty water, then this is the most detailed and geographically consistent mythology ever produced by a culture that never intended it to be read as anything else. That is possible. Mythology is often precise in ways that feel accidental, but the Sumerians did not call the E-abzu symbolic. They called it real, and they built their most ancient temple on top of it, maintained living water inside it, and described its interior with enough architectural specificity that scholars still debate whether the prohibition against entry refers to a ritual restriction or something more structural. They gave Eridu a star that Eridu could not see and placed that star in the path of the deep. They sent the sages back there when the flood came, and they wrote it all down in clay in a city that has been buried under desert sand since before most of recorded history began. The tablet is still in the drawer. The 3 signs have not been explained. The Gulf floor has not been fully scanned. The AI has not been directed at the pattern. The sonar exists. The tools exist. The question exists. Enki sealed something in the pure place where no one is to enter. The Sumerians wrote down that it exists. They wrote down its direction, its depth, and if one disputed reading is even partly accurate, the interval before it becomes relevant again. We have chosen to call that mythology. The clay has not confirmed that choice. It has only waited.